Parenthood is supposed to be about love, care, and protection, but what happens when that bond twists into something terrifying? Behind closed doors, some parents become the very monsters children fear in the dark. Welcome to Bleeding Walls, where we expose the chilling true stories that reveal the darkest side of family life. If you think you're ready to face the horrors that hide within the walls of home, hit that subscribe button and join us as we uncover the most disturbing tales of parenthood gone wrong. Parenthood is supposed to mean love, safety, and a promise to nurture the lives we bring into this world. But sometimes, the very people entrusted to protect become the greatest source of fear. This is the story of the Turpin family, a tale so disturbing that it stunned the world and revealed the chilling truth about the dark side of parenthood. It was the early hours of January 14, 2018, when a young girl dialed 911 from a borrowed cell phone. Her hands shook as she pressed the numbers. She had never held a phone before, never been allowed to speak to the outside world. Her voice, fragile and hesitant, carried the weight of unimaginable pain as she tried to explain her situation to the dispatcher. "There are 13 of us. We're being abused. My parents hold us captive." The girl was 17 years old, but she sounded like a child. Malnourished, frail, and uneducated, her development had been stunted by years of deprivation. The police officer on the other end could barely comprehend the words, but the urgency in her tone was undeniable. She said she had escaped from her home, crawling out through a window into the darkness, determined to save not just herself, but all her siblings. That call triggered one of the most horrifying discoveries in American criminal history. When officers arrived at the Turpin residence in Paris, California, they knocked on the door of what looked like an ordinary suburban home. The beige two-story house blended perfectly into the neighborhood, with its neatly trimmed lawn and cars parked in the driveway. Nothing about it screamed danger. But as soon as authorities stepped inside, the illusion shattered. The stench of human waste, rotten food, and filth clung to the air. The walls were stained, the carpet sticky, the rooms filled with trash. And then they saw the children. One by one, pale and emaciated figures emerged from the shadows. Their eyes were wide with terror, their bodies frail as skeletons. Some had their limbs shackled to beds, heavy chains binding them like prisoners. The youngest appeared no older than toddlers, yet the oldest, who should have been strong young adults, looked barely like teenagers. The officers struggled to believe what they were seeing. These were not strangers or hostages. These were the biological children of David and Louise Turpin, the homeowners who stood calmly in the corner as if nothing were wrong. David and Louise Turpin had constructed an elaborate prison for their own offspring, disguised under the pretense of parenting. To the outside world, they projected an image of a devout Christian family dedicated to homeschooling and raising their children with strict values. In truth, their version of homeschooling was nothing more than isolation. The children were forbidden from interacting with neighbors, extended family, or even each other without permission. They had been pulled from normal schools and kept indoors, their lives reduced to the narrow confines of 4 decaying walls. The Turpins controlled every aspect of their children's existence, what they ate, when they slept, and how they moved. Starvation was a constant weapon. While David and Louise indulged in fast food and luxuries, the children were given meager portions of bread, peanut butter, or frozen food. They were forced to watch their parents feast, knowing hunger would gnaw at their stomachs through the night. Showers were restricted to once a year. Any violation of their endless rules was met with brutal punishment, beatings, restraints, or worse, being chained to a bed for weeks at a time. Neighbors occasionally noticed something strange about the Turpin children. They were pale, awkward, and thin, but when asked their ages, the responses never matched their appearance. A 17-year-old girl looked like she was barely 10. A 29-year-old son had the body of a teenager, yet no one intervened. The Turpins had perfected the art of secrecy. They dressed their children in matching modest clothing, lined them up in family portraits, and presented themselves as quirky but loving parents. On social media, Louise posted pictures of smiling children during staged outings to Disneyland or Las Vegas. The reality was far more sinister. The children rarely spoke, and when they did, their voices were quiet, monotone, as if language itself was foreign to them. They had no knowledge of the outside world, no idea what medicine was, what police represented, or even what basic hygiene meant. Years of captivity had crushed their ability to dream, to hope, to even believe that life could be different. They were ghosts living in plain sight, shackled in silence. For years, the children had whispered about escape, but fear kept them bound. Their parents had convinced them that the world outside was dangerous, that no one would believe their cries for help. But one night, the 17-year-old daughter, whose courage would change everything, decided she could no longer endure it. She stole a phone from the house and slipped through a window into the night. Her escape was not without terror. She carried photographs she had taken of her chained siblings, proof of the horror that awaited inside. She ran down the street, barefoot and trembling, unsure if she would make it far before her parents discovered her absence. When the police met her, she looked more like a lost child than a teenager. Yet behind her frail body was a determination that would ultimately save 12 others. As news broke of the House of Horrors, the world was captivated and horrified. How could such abuse have gone undetected for so long? How could parents do this to their own children? David and Louise Turpin were arrested on the spot. In the days that followed, details of the children's suffering came to light in court hearings and media reports. Doctors confirmed that all 13 siblings were severely malnourished. Some were so underweight they appeared decades younger than their true ages. Their muscles had atrophied, their growth stunted, and their psychological trauma was immeasurable. One investigator recalled the smell of human waste being so overpowering that officers had to cover their faces. Beds were covered in chains, the instruments of captivity still warm from recent use. The Turpin parents showed little remorse. David, a former engineer, and Louise, a self-styled homemaker, insisted they were following God's will and raising their children with discipline. But their cruelty was undeniable. In February 2019, David and Louise Turpin pled guilty to multiple charges of torture, false imprisonment, child abuse, and cruelty to dependent adults. Both were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. During the sentencing, some of the Turpin children bravely addressed the court. Their voices shook, but their words were filled with hope. One daughter said, "My parents took my whole life from me, but now I'm taking it back." The courtroom wept as the children, once silent prisoners, reclaimed their right to exist, to live, and to dream. Rescuing the Turpin children was only the beginning. Rehabilitation was a long and painful process. They had to learn basic skills most people take for granted: how to eat properly, how to bathe, how to communicate. Therapists and foster families worked tirelessly to rebuild their shattered identities. Yet even after their escape, challenges remained. Reports surfaced that some of the siblings faced neglect within the foster system, their needs overlooked by the very institutions meant to protect them. Their story serves as a haunting reminder that survival is only the first step. Healing is a lifelong battle. The Turpin case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Evil doesn't always hide in strangers. Sometimes it lives within the walls we call home. The very people who should embody love and safety can become the architects of nightmares. David and Louise Turpin created a house of horrors, not in some isolated cabin or distant compound, but in a middle-class neighborhood where neighbors waved, where teachers and doctors were absent, where the system failed to see the warning signs. It is a story of unimaginable cruelty, but also of unimaginable strength. The courage of one 17-year-old girl to break free from her chains and risk everything saved not only her own life, but the lives of 12 others. Her bravery turned whispers of pain into a roar for justice, reminding us all that even in the darkest prisons, the human spirit still longs for freedom. The story of the Turpin family is more than just a headline. It is a chilling testament to the darkness that can fester behind closed doors, a reminder that appearances can deceive, and a warning that monsters do not always wear masks. Sometimes they wear the title of parent. And yet, amidst the horror, it is also a story of survival, of resilience, and of hope. Because even in a world where childhood was stolen, where innocence was shackled, and where love was twisted into torture, the children found the strength to rise. That is the dark side of parenthood. That is the nightmare of the Turpin family. Parenthood is meant to be the most sacred bond in the human experience. It is the responsibility to protect, nurture, and guide the lives we create. But sometimes, that bond is not love at all. It is obsession, selfishness, and cruelty wrapped in the mask of motherhood. In May 1983, the world witnessed one of the most shocking betrayals of parental duty when Diane Downs, a mother of 3, turned her children into victims of her own twisted desires. This is the horrifying true story of how a mother's love became her children's worst nightmare. On May 19, 1983, a frantic woman arrived at Mackenzie Willamette Hospital in Springfield, Oregon. Behind the wheel of a red Nissan Pulsar, her hands bloodied and trembling, Diane Downs screamed for help. Inside the car were her 3 young children, 8-year-old Christy, 7-year-old Cheryl, and 3-year-old Danny, each riddled with gunshot wounds. Diane's story was quick and rehearsed. She claimed she had been driving her children home when a shaggy-haired stranger flagged her down on a deserted road. According to Diane, the man demanded her car. When she refused, he pulled out a gun and shot her children in cold blood. She said she had wrestled with him, even suffered a bullet wound in her arm before he fled into the night. It was the perfect story of a mother's courage and a family's tragedy. Or so Diane believed. But as doctors fought to save the lives of the children, cracks in Diane's account began to surface, revealing something far darker than a random act of violence. At the hospital, doctors rushed the children into emergency surgery. Little Cheryl, just 7 years old, was already gone. Her small body could not survive the trauma of the bullets. Christy, 8, clung to life by a thread, suffering a massive stroke as surgeons worked desperately to repair the damage. Danny, the youngest, survived but was left paralyzed from the waist down. As the children lay between life and death, Diane sat in the waiting area, calm, collected, and strangely detached. Witnesses would later recall her demeanor as odd for a grieving mother. She seemed more concerned with herself than her dying children, casually chatting and even flirting with the hospital staff. The police took her statement, but the inconsistencies were already glaring. For one, Diane's wound was superficial, a single bullet to her arm that appeared self-inflicted. Secondly, despite claiming a stranger had attempted to steal her car, the keys were still in the ignition and the vehicle showed no sign of theft. But the most chilling detail was the way Diane spoke about her children. Her tone lacked the anguish of a mother whose world had just collapsed. Instead, she seemed rehearsed, almost smug, as if she were telling a story rather than reliving a tragedy. Detectives quickly began to question Diane's version of events. Her calm demeanor, the lack of evidence of a struggle, and her peculiar behavior all raised suspicions. Then came the most damning clue of all. Ballistics revealed that the gun used in the shooting matched a .22 caliber pistol that Diane owned. Though she denied having it at the time, friends and co-workers recalled her showing off the weapon months before. But the question remained, why would a mother shoot her own children? The answer came from Diane's tangled love life. At the time, she was involved with a married man named Robert Knickerbocker, known as Nick. He lived in Arizona and had made it clear that he did not want children. He told Diane in no uncertain terms that he would never accept her kids into his life. For Diane, who was infatuated with him, this became an obsession. In her mind, the children were obstacles standing between her and the man she desired. And in May 1983, she decided to remove those obstacles in the most horrifying way imaginable. As investigators dug deeper, Diane's bizarre actions became more and more chilling. Just days after the shooting, she appeared on television, giving interviews that baffled viewers. Instead of mourning her dead daughter and worrying about her surviving children, she smiled, laughed, and spoke about the crime as if it were a thrilling story. At one point, she even reenacted the shooting, describing in detail how the stranger supposedly attacked her. But her performance betrayed her. She held her injured arm awkwardly, dramatizing the scene with a smirk that made audiences uneasy. Perhaps most disturbing of all was the way she spoke about her daughter Cheryl's death. Rather than expressing grief, she made cold, detached statements like, "I think Cheryl's in a better place now." Her lack of maternal instinct was glaring, her narcissism undeniable. For months, Christy Downs remained unable to speak due to the stroke she suffered during the shooting. But as she slowly recovered, doctors and therapists worked with her to regain her ability to communicate. What she eventually revealed would shatter Diane's carefully crafted story. Through therapy sessions, Christy bravely disclosed that it wasn't a stranger who had shot them, it was their own mother. She recalled the moment in terrifying clarity, how Diane pulled the car over, reached for the gun, and began firing at her children in the back seat. Christie's testimony became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. It was the voice of a child, broken but resilient, that would ultimately bring justice. In May 1984, Diane Downs stood trial for the murder of Cheryl and the attempted murder of Christy and Danny. The courtroom was packed with reporters and spectators, all captivated by the woman whose story had horrified the nation. The prosecution painted Diane as a selfish, narcissistic woman who cared more about her own desires than her children's lives. They argued that she had sacrificed her children for the slim chance of winning over Nick, the man who wanted her but not her family. The defense tried to argue that Diane was the victim of circumstance, that a stranger had indeed committed the crime, and that Christie's memories had been influenced by trauma. But the evidence was overwhelming. Ballistics, witness testimonies, Diane's bizarre behavior, and, most importantly, Christie's brave words. Throughout the trial, Diane's demeanor remained unnervingly calm. She smiled at cameras, flirted with reporters, and seemed to relish the attention. She even became pregnant during the trial, allegedly to gain sympathy from the jury. Instead, it only deepened the perception of her manipulative nature. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just over 36 hours before returning their verdict. Guilty. Diane Downs was convicted of murder, attempted murder, and assault. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Diane's imprisonment did little to change her behavior. She continued to insist on her innocence, weaving new versions of her story and blaming shadowy strangers for the crime. Over the years, she gave multiple interviews from prison, each time displaying the same unnerving detachment and narcissism that had defined her trial. Meanwhile, Christy and Danny were adopted by the lead prosecutor in the case, Fred Hugi, and his wife. They provided the children with a safe and loving home, far removed from the horror of their early lives. Despite the trauma, Christy grew into a resilient young woman, determined not to let her mother's betrayal define her. Danny, though confined to a wheelchair, also found strength in the family that took him in. What makes the Diane Downs case so chilling is not just the act itself, but the psychology behind it. Diane was not a mother driven by desperation or poverty. She was not mentally incapable of understanding the harm she caused. She was calculating, selfish, and entirely motivated by her own desires. To Diane, her children were not human beings with their own lives and futures. They were pawns, obstacles, inconveniences that stood between her and the fantasy life she craved. She believed she could discard them like objects, confident that her charm and lies would shield her from suspicion. Her complete lack of remorse, her obsession with control, and her manipulative behavior all paint the picture of a woman devoid of maternal instinct. She was a predator hiding in plain sight, cloaked in the title of Mother. The story of Diane Downs has haunted true crime history for decades. Books, documentaries, and films have all revisited the case, each time reminding audiences of the unimaginable truth, that sometimes the greatest threat to a child's safety comes from the very person who gave them life. Her betrayal is not just a crime against her children, it is a crime against the very idea of motherhood. Diane weaponized the trust and innocence of her children, turning the bond that should have been their protection into their destruction. The Diane Downs case forces us to confront the darkest question of all. How can a mother turn against her own children? The answer lies not in love, but in the absence of it. Diane Downs never saw her children as lives to nurture. She saw them as barriers to remove. Her story is a chilling reminder that evil does not always come in the form of strangers lurking in the dark. Sometimes it wears the smile of a mother, the softness of a caregiver, the trusted voice that lulls children to sleep. And when that trust is betrayed, the horror is beyond comprehension. Diane Downs will spend the rest of her life behind bars, but the scars she left on her children will never fully fade. Her name will forever stand as a symbol of parental betrayal, a chilling example of the dark side of parenthood. In a quiet neighborhood in Springfield, Missouri, nestled among rows of modest homes, stood a small pink house that radiated innocence. Its front yard featured a wheelchair ramp, and the walls inside were adorned with photos of a smiling girl named Gypsy Rose Blanchard, usually shown with her mother, Claudine D.D. Blanchard, always by her side. At first glance, theirs appeared to be the portrait of unconditional love, a devoted mother and her chronically ill daughter surviving together against all odds. But behind the pastel-colored facade and their carefully curated public image lurked one of the most disturbing cases of abuse and manipulation ever to surface in modern America. This is the story of a mother who slowly poisoned her daughter's identity, her autonomy, and her reality, and of a daughter whose only way out led her to murder. From the moment Gypsy was born in 1991, Dee Dee began constructing a narrative around her child's health that would eventually consume both of their lives. According to Dee Dee, Gypsy suffered from leukemia, muscular dystrophy, severe asthma, epilepsy, a chromosomal disorder, vision and hearing, impairments, and cognitive delays. She told doctors that Gypsy was developmentally disabled and confined to a wheelchair. The list of conditions was long and ever-growing. What's most shocking is that nearly all of it was a lie. Dee Dee presented herself as a selfless, tireless caregiver who had given up everything to tend to her daughter's many needs. The medical community, charitable organizations, and neighbors all saw her as a hero. Gypsy was the face of countless fundraising events and received trips from the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Habitat for Humanity built them the now infamous Pink House. And when Hurricane Katrina devastated their home in Louisiana in 2005, mother and daughter relocated to Missouri, where the fresh start allowed Dee Dee to weave an even tighter web of deception. Doctors who treated Gypsy were often puzzled by the contradictions in her symptoms and medical history. Dee Dee would bring extensive medical records, some of which were falsified or selectively edited. When one physician began to suspect Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a mental illness in which a caregiver exaggerates or induces illness in someone under their care to gain attention, he filed a report. But somehow, it was buried in the system. Dee Dee had an uncanny ability to deflect scrutiny, often by switching providers or claiming that missing documentation had been lost during the hurricane. As Gypsy grew older, her true self began to emerge from under the weight of her mother's delusions. Despite being told she had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old, she was, in fact, mentally sharp and observant. She knew that something was wrong. Her hair had been shaved by Dee Dee to keep up appearances of chemotherapy, though she had never needed it. She was fed through a feeding tube even though she could eat solid food. Her teeth rotted from unnecessary medications and a lack of proper dental care. And most tellingly, she could walk, though she was never allowed to do so in public. Gypsy was isolated from the outside world. She was homeschooled, didn't have friends her own age, and was forbidden to use the internet unsupervised. Any attempts to express independence were quickly shut down by Dee Dee, who used fear and guilt as tools of control. Whenever Gypsy questioned her illness or suggested she could do more for herself, Dee Dee would punish her, sometimes by withholding food, other times through physical abuse. To outsiders, it was always presented as a medical necessity or behavioral correction. Still, Gypsy's curiosity couldn't be completely stifled. Secretly, she began using the internet at night while Dee Dee slept. She discovered that she wasn't nearly as sick as she'd been told. She began to question everything. Then, in 2012, she stumbled into a Christian chat room where she met Nicholas Godejohn, a man who would eventually become both her rescuer and her accomplice. Nicholas was a socially awkward man with a reported history of mental illness, including dissociative identity disorder and autism. The two began a secret online relationship, exchanging messages and explicit photos. Gypsy saw him as a way out, a lifeline, and someone who loved her without judgment. To Nicholas, Gypsy became an obsession, and he was willing to do anything for her. Over time, their online romance intensified. They discussed marriage, sex, and escape. But as their relationship grew more serious, so did their plans, and eventually they reached a terrifying conclusion. The only way Gypsy could ever be free was if Dee Dee were dead. On the night of June 10th, 2015, after months of planning, Nicholas traveled from Wisconsin to Missouri. Gypsy let him into the house while Dee Dee slept. Hiding in the bathroom, she covered her ears while Nicholas stabbed Dee Dee multiple times in her bed. The murder was brutal, and Gypsy later said she couldn't bear to watch or hear her mother die. Afterward, they took some cash and fled to Wisconsin, where they holed up at Nicholas's house. Before leaving, Gypsy posted a chilling message on the shared Facebook page she had with Dee Dee. "That bitch is dead." It was crude and confusing, but intentionally so. Gypsy hoped someone would find the body and that it would all be over. Police found Dee Dee's body 4 days later, face down in her bed, stabbed 17 times. There were no signs of forced entry. Suspicion quickly turned toward Gypsy, who was assumed to be either abducted or dead. When authorities tracked the Facebook IP address to Wisconsin, they were shocked to find her alive and walking under her own power. What followed was a media frenzy. The narrative shifted from missing victim to willing killer to abused daughter. As the truth unraveled, the public's initial horror turned into disbelief, then sympathy. Gypsy, now speaking for herself for the first time, revealed years of torment and medical abuse. She explained how her mother had manipulated doctors, social workers, and even her own perception of reality. Investigators unearthed a complex pattern of deceit. Dee Dee had fabricated nearly all of Gypsy's illnesses, keeping her subdued with medications and psychological control. Some of Gypsy's medical records were missing entirely. Others contradicted each other. She had undergone numerous unnecessary surgeries, including the insertion of a feeding tube, a muscle biopsy, and multiple hospitalizations, all for conditions she didn't have. During her interrogation, Gypsy didn't cry. She didn't show remorse in the way authorities expected. Instead, There was a strange calm about her, as if a great weight had been lifted. She told the truth, without embellishment, without excuses. She said she felt trapped and powerless. She said her mother would never have let her go, and no one had believed her cries for help. In 2016, Gypsy pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Nicholas Godejohn was tried separately, found guilty of first-degree murder, and sentenced to life without parole. The two were never romantically involved again after the killing, and Gypsy later expressed that she didn't fully grasp the consequences of what they were doing at the time. The case sparked national debate and widespread media coverage. Documentaries like Mommy Dead and Dearest and the Hulu series The Act introduced the world to the chilling dynamic of Dee Dee and Gypsy's relationship. The story was no longer just about a murder. It had become a lens into how abuse can be hidden in plain sight, how the medical system can be manipulated, and how love can be weaponized into control. Gypsy's story is not one of simple good versus evil. It's a haunting exploration of the psychological chains forged by toxic parenting. Dee Dee's motives remain a dark mystery. Some believe she genuinely suffered from Munchausen by proxy, a rare and complex mental illness rooted in the desire for attention and sympathy. Others argue she was a manipulative narcissist, fully aware of the damage she was inflicting. What makes the case so terrifying is that it all happened so quietly. Neighbors praised Dee Dee as a model mother. Charities showered the family with gifts. No one questioned the story for over 2 decades. It's a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the greatest horrors happen behind closed doors in the name of love. In 2025, Gypsy Rose Blanchard was released from prison after serving 85% of her sentence. Now in her early 30s, she's a free woman for the first time in her life. Public opinion remains divided. Some see her as a murderer, others as a survivor. But one thing is undeniable. She spent the first 23 years of her life imprisoned by her mother, and the next decade imprisoned by the system. What lies ahead for her remains uncertain. But for those who followed the case, her story stands as a chilling testament to the dark side of parenthood, where maternal love becomes control and care becomes captivity. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how easily abuse can be masked as devotion and how far a child might go to escape it. It was close to midnight when the shrill ringing of the phone jolted Karen Thompson out of a light, uneasy sleep. Her husband, Michael, stirred beside her, groaning in irritation as he rolled onto his side. Karen blinked groggily at the glowing red digits on the alarm clock. 11:58 p.m. No one called this late unless something was wrong. Karen fumbled for the cordless phone on the nightstand, her heart already thumping with dread. "Hello?" she whispered into the receiver, trying not to wake her younger daughter asleep in the next room. "Mom?" "It's me," a shaky, familiar voice said. "Can you come pick me up? Please, I don't want to be here anymore." It was her son, Tyler, 16 years old, still learning the limits of his independence and prone to late-night regrets whenever he pushed them too far. Relief washed over Karen for a moment. He wasn't hurt, just stuck at a friend's house. But the relief quickly curdled into confusion. "Tyler, where are you?" she asked, sitting up straighter in bed. "I'm at Eric's," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't like it here. Something's wrong. Can you come?" Karen frowned. Eric lived on the other side of town. She and Michael had dropped Tyler off earlier in the evening for what he described as a low-key movie night with a couple of friends. She had made him promise, twice, that there wouldn't be any drinking or trouble. "Why don't you want to stay? Did you two fight?" she asked, already swinging her legs out of bed. "No," Tyler said quickly. "It's not that. Just, please come get me, Mom. Please." The urgency in his voice left her unsettled. "All right, honey. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Just stay inside, okay?" He murmured a quiet thanks before the line went dead. Karen threw on a sweater and jeans. Michael grumbled when she told him where she was going, but rolled over and went back to sleep, muttering something about spoiled teenagers. Karen didn't argue. She had learned long ago to trust a mother's instincts, and something about the way Tyler had sounded filled her with unease. The streets were deserted as she drove across town. The orange glow of the street lamps stretched across empty pavement, and her tires hummed against the road. A fog had begun to creep in, settling low to the ground, swirling in her headlights. Eric's house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac surrounded by tall pines. Karen slowed as she approached, squinting through the fog. The house was completely dark. No porch light, no glow from the windows, not even the faint blue flicker of a TV. She checked the house number twice. This was the place. Unease prickled along her skin. Karen pulled into the driveway, cut the engine, and got out, pulling her sweater tighter against the chill. She walked up to the door and rang the bell. The chime echoed faintly inside the house, but no one stirred. She waited, then rang again. Still nothing. She pulled out her phone and called Tyler back. The call connected, rang once, then went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. Her pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. Karen circled around to the side of the house, peering through the windows. Every room she could see into was empty, dark, and lifeless. It didn't look like anyone was home at all. Her phone buzzed in her hand, making her jump. It was a text message. From Tyler. "Where are you? Why aren't you coming?" Her stomach dropped. She typed back quickly. "I'm at Eric's. The house is dark. Where are you exactly?" 3 dots appeared as he typed. Then his reply came, "Inside. Back room. Please hurry." Karen's breath caught. Inside? How could that be? She had just looked through the windows. She hadn't seen anyone. She tried the front door. Locked. She hesitated, then knocked hard, calling, "Tyler! It's Mom! Open the door!" Silence. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. "He won't let me." Karen's hands went cold. "Who?" She typed furiously. No reply came. She stood there, trembling on the doorstep, torn between breaking in and calling the police. But what would she even say? That her teenage son had texted her from inside a dark, empty house. They'd dismiss her as hysterical. The fog swirled thicker around the driveway. The neighborhood seemed to have fallen into a deeper, unnatural silence. She was about to dial 911 when her phone rang again. Tyler's number. Relieved, she answered quickly. "Tyler, where are you? I'm here." But the voice that came through froze her blood. "Mom," he whispered, "why are you outside?" "I'm at home." Karen's grip tightened on the phone. At home?" she echoed, her knees going weak. "Yeah," Tyler said sleepily. "In my room. I just woke up. Why? What's wrong?" Karen turned slowly to stare at the empty street, the dark house, the heavy fog closing in around her. Her mouth went dry. "Tyler," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you called me. You asked me to come get you." There was a pause on the other end. "No, I didn't. I've been asleep. Mum, are you okay?" Her heart hammered so violently she thought she might faint. "Stay where you are," she managed to choke out. "Don't open the door for anyone. Do you hear me?" "Yes, but—" She hung up before he could finish, her hands shaking. Someone had used her son's voice. Someone had known his words, his tone, even the way he pleaded with her, and they had lured her here, to this empty house. Karen backed away, nearly tripping on the steps in her haste. She bolted to her car, fumbling with the keys, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The moment she slammed the door shut and locked it, something moved in the shadows near the edge of the yard. She froze, staring through the fog. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure standing among the pines, tall, still, watching. The shape was indistinct, but her instincts screamed at her that whoever, or whatever it was, had been waiting for her. Her phone buzzed one last time. Another text from the same number. "Next time, don't be late." Karen's scream tore through the silence as she jammed the car into reverse, backing out of the driveway so fast her tires skidded against the asphalt. She didn't stop driving until she was back in her own neighborhood, trembling so violently she could barely hold the wheel. When she finally pulled into her driveway, the porch light was on, and the sight of it nearly brought her to tears. She rushed inside, ran upstairs, and burst into Tyler's room. He was there, asleep in his bed, just as he had said. His chest rose and fell with slow, steady breaths. Karen sank to her knees beside him, pressing a hand to her mouth to keep from sobbing aloud. She knew then that she couldn't tell Michael or anyone else what had happened. They would never believe her. But she believed it. And she knew with a bone-deep certainty that kept her awake long into the night that whoever or whatever had called her that night wasn't finished. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in late spring, and the Thompson household was buzzing with excitement. Emily, their youngest daughter, was turning 8, and the backyard was decorated with pastel balloons, streamers, and a long folding table stacked with cupcakes and goodie bags. Laughter filled the air as children ran across the lawn, chasing each other with party hats askew, the smell of grilled hot dogs drifting from the patio where Michael manned the barbecue. Karen, her mother, stood off to the side, snapping photos with her phone. She wanted to capture every smile, every burst of joy. Emily was growing up so quickly, and each birthday felt like a marker in time she would never get back. By the time the cake was brought out, a pink frosted confection topped with 8 flickering candles, Karen had already taken nearly 100 pictures. She crouched low, angling her phone just right to capture Emily's glowing face as her friends sang "Happy Birthday." Emily blew out the candles in one triumphant breath, her eyes sparkling as everyone cheered. Karen snapped another photo, smiling to herself. A perfect memory, or so she thought. The party wound down by early evening. Parents came and collected their children, the mess of wrapping paper and half-empty cups slowly being cleared away. Exhausted but happy, Karen flopped onto the couch once everything was quiet again. Michael put on the news in the background, while Emily disappeared upstairs to play with her new toys. Karen opened the photo gallery on her phone, scrolling through the images she had taken that day. She smiled at the candid shots, kids with icing smeared across their cheeks, Emily clutching her new doll, Michael flipping burgers on the grill. Her finger paused on the birthday cake photos. She tapped one to enlarge it. At first, it seemed ordinary enough. Emily leaning forward, her lips pursed, the soft glow of candlelight illuminating her face. But then Karen's gaze drifted to her daughter's left shoulder, and her heart skipped a beat. There was a hand resting there. Not Emily's and not anyone else's from the party. It was pale, almost sickly white, with long, slender fingers curled lightly over the fabric of Emily's dress. Karen frowned, zooming in. Her breath caught in her throat. The hand didn't look quite right. The fingers were too long, the knuckles oddly bent as if the joints didn't belong to a human skeleton. The nails were dark, almost black, and seemed too pointed. Most disturbing of all, there was no one standing next to Emily in the photo, just empty air. Karen blinked hard and backed out of the photo, her pulse quickening. Maybe it was a trick of the light, some strange overlap of shadows. She tapped on the next picture in sequence, taken only seconds later. The hand was still there. Only now it had shifted slightly, the fingers digging deeper into her daughter's shoulder. Karen's stomach turned to ice. She scrolled faster through the photos. In every single shot of Emily at the cake, the hand was there. Sometimes faint, sometimes more distinct, but always gripping her shoulder. Her first instinct was to show Michael. But when she turned toward him, sitting on the recliner with his attention half on the TV, something stopped her. He was the type to dismiss things, to laugh them off, to tell her she was overthinking. And maybe she was. Maybe it was nothing. Still, unease clung to her like static. That night, Karen couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that pale hand. She finally gave up around 2 a.m. and slipped downstairs, scrolling through the photos again in the dim glow of her phone. This time, she noticed something she hadn't before. In the reflection of the kitchen window behind Emily, barely visible in the shadows, was the faint outline of a figure. A tall, dark shape leaning over her daughter, its features obscured by the glare of the candlelight. Karen dropped the phone with a gasp, her whole body trembling. The next morning, she tried to brush it off. She told herself it was just a trick of light, a camera glitch, or maybe her tired imagination. She didn't want to frighten Emily or herself. But over the next few days, small things began happening around the house. Emily started complaining of nightmares. She told her mother that she dreamed of someone standing beside her bed at night, whispering things she couldn't quite understand. She said she could feel someone's hand on her shoulder, heavy and cold, even though no one was there. Karen's unease deepened. She deleted the photos from her phone, thinking that might help, but somehow that only made things worse. Emily's nightmares grew more vivid. She refused to sleep in her own room, insisting on crawling into her parents' bed at night. One evening, as Karen was folding laundry, she noticed something strange on Emily's dress, the one she had worn at the party. Right on the left shoulder, where the pale hand had rested in the photos, the fabric was stretched and frayed, as if someone had gripped it too tightly. A chill spread through her. She tucked the dress deep into the back of the closet, but the unease never left her. Then came the night she woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate, too heavy to belong to Emily. Karen sat up in bed, holding her breath. The footsteps stopped just outside the bedroom door. She waited, her heart pounding in her throat. The door creaked open. In the dim light, she saw Emily standing there. But something was wrong. Her daughter's eyes were open far too wide, her face pale and blank, her arms hanging limply at her sides. "Sweetheart," Karen whispered, sliding out of bed. Emily didn't answer. She just stood there, frozen before raising one trembling hand to touch her shoulder, the same shoulder from the photo. Karen knelt down, panic rising. "Emily, what's wrong? Did you have another bad dream?" Her daughter's lips parted. When she spoke, her voice was not her own. "He's here." Karen recoiled, a cold sweat breaking across her skin. "Who's here?" she whispered. Emily's eyes rolled back, her body swaying as though she might collapse. Karen caught her, shaking her gently until she blinked back into awareness, confused and crying. The next morning, Karen called a friend who worked in photography, hoping for some rational explanation for the strange images. But when she sent him one of the photos, he called her back almost immediately. "Karen, I don't know what to tell you," he said, his voice uneasy. "That's not a glitch. The shadows, the way the hand overlaps, it's in the photo. It was really there." Karen's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. That night, she and Michael argued. He thought she was scaring Emily unnecessarily, that she was letting her imagination run wild. But Karen knew what she had seen. She knew something had attached itself to her daughter that day, and she feared it had no intention of letting go. The following weeks became a blur of dread. Emily grew paler, quieter, as though her energy were being drained. She no longer wanted to play with her toys or go outside. She often sat staring into empty corners of the room, her small hand resting on her shoulder, rubbing it absently as though trying to soothe a lingering pain. One night, as Karen tucked her into bed, Emily looked up at her and whispered, "Mom, He says he likes me. He says he chose me. Karen forced a trembling smile, her heart breaking. Who, baby? Who's saying that? Emily's eyes darted to the dark corner of the room. Karen didn't look. She didn't want to see, but she knew. And she understood, with a bone-deep certainty, that whatever had placed its hand on her daughter's shoulder in that birthday photo had never let go. It began with a gift. The box had arrived unexpectedly, wrapped in brown paper and tied with coarse twine. There was no return address, only a neat scrawl across the top. For Emily. Karen found it sitting on the porch one afternoon, the spring air damp with the smell of rain. She assumed it was from her sister in Maine, who often sent little surprises for Emily, her only niece. When Emily came home from school, her eyes lit up at the sight of the package. She tore through the paper with eager fingers, revealing a pale porcelain doll nestled in tissue paper. Its painted face was delicately detailed, rosy cheeks, red lips, and wide blue eyes that seemed almost too lifelike. Golden curls framed its face, and it wore a faded lace dress that smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Emily gasped in delight. "She's beautiful. I'll call her Annabelle," she declared, hugging the doll tightly. Karen smiled, though unease prickled faintly at the back of her mind. There was something unsettling about the doll's eyes. Too shiny, too knowing. Still, she brushed it off as her imagination. Children's toys had always carried a certain eeriness when looked at too long. For the first few days, Emily was inseparable from Annabelle. She carried the doll everywhere, at the dinner table, in the car, even to bed. Karen didn't protest. She was glad her daughter was happy. But soon, odd things began happening. One night, as Karen tucked Emily into bed, she found the doll sitting in the rocking chair by the window. She was certain she had left it on the dresser earlier. When she asked Emily about it, the girl shrugged. "She likes to watch outside," she said simply. Another evening, Karen walked past Emily's room and heard her daughter whispering. She peeked in, expecting to find Emily on the phone with a friend, but she was alone, clutching the doll tightly against her chest. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" Karen asked. Emily looked up with wide, innocent eyes. "Annabelle. She tells me stories." Karen's stomach tightened. "What kind of stories?" Emily hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the doll. "She says she used to live in a big house. She says she didn't like the people there. She says she likes me better." Karen forced a smile, hiding her unease. Kids had vivid imaginations, she reminded herself. There was nothing unusual about that. But that night, long after Emily had fallen asleep, Karen crept into the room and picked up the doll. Its glassy eyes seemed to glint in the moonlight as she studied its face. She told herself she was being ridiculous. Still, she carried the doll into the attic and set it in an old cedar trunk, closing the lid firmly. She slept easier that night, until Emily woke her the next morning, clutching Annabelle tightly in her arms. "She doesn't like the attic," Emily whispered. Karen froze. She hadn't told her daughter where she had hidden it. That was the first time true fear settled into her bones. Days passed, and the atmosphere in the house grew heavy. Emily began waking from nightmares, screaming that someone was pulling her hair or scratching at her arms. Karen and Michael dismissed it as bad dreams, but when Karen noticed faint red marks on Emily's shoulders, marks shaped almost like tiny fingers, she knew it wasn't just imagination. One stormy night, as thunder rolled outside, Karen was jolted awake by the sound of the rocking chair creaking. She sat up, heart pounding, and saw Emily standing in the doorway. In her arms was the doll. "She wants to go back to the attic," Emily said in a flat, distant voice. Karen scrambled out of bed. "No, sweetheart, come here. Put the doll down." But Emily only clutched it tighter, her small knuckles white. Her eyes looked strange, vacant, almost as though someone else were peering out through them. Karen rushed forward, prying the doll from her daughter's grip. Emily screamed, thrashing and clawing, her face twisted in rage unlike anything Karen had ever seen. "Give her back!" she shrieked, her voice raw. "She's mine!" Karen's hands shook as she carried the doll up to the attic, ignoring her daughter's cries echoing behind her. She shoved it back into the trunk, slamming the lid closed and locking it with an old latch. She stood there for a long time, trembling in the dark, listening to the rain hammering against the roof. When she finally returned downstairs, she found Emily asleep on the couch, her tear-streaked face peaceful once more, as if nothing had happened. Karen didn't sleep at all that night. The days that followed blurred into a haze of dread. Strange noises echoed from the attic, soft thuds, the faint creak of the trunk shifting. Sometimes Karen swore she heard whispers drifting down the stairs, hushed voices just out of reach. Emily grew quieter, withdrawn. She stopped eating properly, stopped playing with her toys. Sometimes Karen caught her staring at the ceiling, her lips moving silently, as if listening to someone only she could hear. One evening, Karen heard her daughter giggling in the hallway. She turned the corner and froze. Emily was standing at the foot of the attic stairs, gazing upward with a smile that didn't belong on an 8-year-old's face. "She says you can't keep her away forever," Emily said softly. Karen's blood ran cold. That night she told Michael everything. He listened with a frown, then sighed heavily. "It's a doll, Karen. A dollar. You're scaring yourself, and you're scaring Emily. Just throw it out if it bothers you so much." But Karen couldn't. Something inside her whispered that it wasn't that simple. The doll wasn't just a toy. It was watching, waiting. Finally, one desperate night, she decided to get rid of it. She crept into the attic, heart pounding, and carried the trunk down the stairs. She drove for miles, out to the edge of the woods, where she dug a shallow hole beneath an oak tree and buried the doll, the earth swallowing its pale face. For the first time in weeks, she felt relief. But it didn't last. The next morning, she found Emily sitting at the kitchen table, clutching the doll in her arms. "She came back," her daughter whispered, eyes hollow. "She said you can't hide her. She said she belongs with me." Karen's scream caught in her throat. She snatched the doll away and locked it in the shed, nailing the door shut. That night, as the family slept, a loud crash woke them. Karen and Michael ran outside to find the shed door wide open, the nails scattered across the ground. Inside, the shelves had been overturned, tools thrown to the floor. The doll was gone. And when they rushed back inside, their hearts pounding, they found Emily sitting upright in bed, the doll cradled in her lap, her eyes staring blankly at the wall. "She's never leaving me," Emily whispered. "Never." Karen collapsed to her knees, sobbing, realizing too late that the gift had never been a gift at all. It was a curse, and it had chosen her daughter. The first time Karen and Michael heard it, they dismissed it as a trick of the walls. It was past midnight, and the apartment building was wrapped in silence, the kind that felt too heavy, too complete. Karen had been reading in bed while Michael drifted off beside her, when a faint sound drifted through the thin plaster walls. Soft, pitiful, unmistakable. A baby crying. Karen froze, her book slipping slightly in her hands. The sound was faint at first, but it grew clearer, wavering in the stillness of the night. It wasn't the muffled cry of a child down the hall, but sharp and close, as if the infant were right on the other side of their bedroom wall. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, shaking Michael lightly. He groaned, half asleep. "Hear what?" "The baby," she said, sitting up. "Someone's baby is crying." Michael rubbed his face, listening, and then his brow furrowed. The cries continued, high-pitched and desperate, before tapering off into whimpers. "Strange," he muttered. "The Wilsons moved out last month. No one's supposed to be in that unit." Karen's stomach tightened. She knew the unit next door had been vacant for weeks. She'd even peeked through the dusty window one afternoon out of curiosity, completely empty, stripped bare. Yet tonight, a baby was crying from inside it. Michael shrugged it off. Old building, thin walls, maybe it's coming from upstairs. But Karen wasn't convinced. She lay awake long after the crying stopped, staring at the darkened wall beside her, unease gnawing at her chest. The next night, it happened again. This time, Karen woke abruptly, her heart racing. The cries were louder, more insistent, as though the baby were in pain. She nudged Michael awake, and the two of them sat in tense silence, listening. "Still sounds like it's coming from next door," Michael admitted finally. Karen couldn't take it anymore. She threw on her robe and slippers, grabbed her keys, and stepped into the hallway. The building was quiet, dimly lit by a single buzzing fluorescent light. She walked to the apartment next door, pausing at the door. The crying was unmistakable now, clear, desperate wails spilling from inside. Karen knocked. "Hello? Is someone in there?" No answer. She knocked again, harder. "Do you need help?" The crying stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. Karen stood there, frozen, the hairs rising on the back of her neck. She twisted the knob, but the door was locked. Finally, unnerved, she retreated back to her own apartment. Michael frowned when she told him, maybe the landlord forgot to mention a new tenant. But the next morning, Karen called the landlord herself. "No one's rented that unit yet," he assured her. "Still vacant?" Her skin crawled at his words. Over the following week, the crying became a nightly occurrence. Always after midnight, always from the vacant apartment. Sometimes it was soft, almost soothing, like a lullaby gone wrong. Other times it was sharp, anguished, frantic, like a baby abandoned, begging to be held. Karen began dreading the nights. She barely slept, lying awake listening, her body tense with helplessness. Michael grew frustrated with her obsession, telling her she was feeding into it, but she couldn't help it. The sound burrowed into her chest, filling her with a deep ache. One night, curiosity overpowered fear. She pressed her ear against the wall, listening. The cries were so close, so real, she could almost feel the vibration of them through the plaster. And then, clear as day, she heard a woman's voice. "Shh, hush now, Mommy's here." Karen staggered back, her blood turning to ice. The next day, she pressed the landlord again. He insisted the apartment was empty, and even offered to let her look inside if it would ease her mind. That evening, with Michael reluctantly tagging along, Karen met him at the building. The landlord unlocked the unit, pushing the door open to reveal a barren interior. The space was empty. No furniture, no boxes, nothing but a layer of dust on the hardwood floor. "See, no tenants," the landlord said. Karen walked through the apartment slowly, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The silence was suffocating, heavy with something she couldn't name. She paused in the middle of the living room, a strange shiver crawling up her spine. It was as if the air itself remembered. That night, the crying returned, louder than ever. Karen began researching the building, combing through old records and news articles. It didn't take long before she found something. 15 years earlier, a young couple had lived in that very apartment. The mother had been alone one night when the baby wouldn't stop crying. Neighbors later reported hearing hours of screaming before everything went quiet. The next morning, the infant was found lifeless in the crib. Authorities called it neglect. The mother had been taken away, raving about how she hadn't meant to hurt her baby, how she had only wanted the crying to stop. Karen closed her laptop with trembling hands. The next night, the baby's cries carried a new tone. Anguish, pain, grief. And beneath it, faint but clear, Karen thought she heard another sound. A woman sobbing. Sleep became impossible. Karen started waking at odd hours, her ears straining for the cries. Sometimes they came from behind the wall, sometimes from the hallway. Once, she swore she heard them right outside her bedroom door. Michael tried to comfort her, but she could see the fear creeping into his eyes as well. He couldn't deny it anymore. He heard it too. One night, unable to bear it, Karen stood in the hallway again, staring at the vacant apartment's door. The crying echoed from inside, louder, more desperate than ever. Her chest ached with an overwhelming urge to help, to open the door and scoop the child into her arms. Her hand reached for the knob before she realized what she was doing. The moment her fingers brushed the cold brass, the crying stopped. Silence pressed down like a weight. Then, from the other side of the door, came a single soft knock. Karen stumbled backward, heart slamming against her ribs. The final straw came 2 nights later. Karen woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of crying again, but this time it wasn't muffled through walls. It was in her apartment. She sat up slowly, terror clawing at her throat. The sound was coming from the corner of the bedroom. Her eyes adjusted to the dark, and she froze. There, on the floor by the dresser, was a shadowy shape. Small, curled, writhing as the cries filled the room. The shape of a baby. Karen gasped, and the crying stopped. The shadow evaporated into the dark. She grabbed Michael, sobbing, but when he turned on the lamp, the room was empty. The next morning, she begged him to move. He resisted, but after a week of relentless cries, he gave in. On their last night in the apartment, as Karen packed boxes, the cries began one final time. Louder, anguished, filling every corner of the unit. She clamped her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. But then, for the first time, she heard words. "Don't leave me." The voice was soft, fragile, filled with sorrow. Karen broke down completely. She wanted to answer, to comfort whoever lingered there, but Michael pulled her away, dragging her out the door. They never looked back. Yet even years later, in the quiet of her new home, Karen sometimes swears she hears it again. A faint cry in the dead of night, begging not to be forgotten. Deep down, she knows she never will. It started as something innocent, the way it always does. Karen loved how creative her son, Ethan, could be. At 7 years old, he was always sketching. Dinosaurs, superheroes, silly doodles of the family dog. His teachers praised his imagination, and Karen proudly pinned his drawings to the refrigerator. But one afternoon, as she sorted through his backpack, she found something that stopped her cold. It was a drawing of Ethan's bedroom. The details were unmistakable. The square window above his bed, the toy chest in the corner, even the patterned rug on the floor. But it wasn't the room itself that unsettled her. It was the figures. 7 black stick figures were clustered around Ethan's bed, drawn with jagged, uneven lines. They had long arms, spindly legs, and round, empty circles for eyes. Ethan had drawn himself too, lying in bed with a sad, frightened expression, surrounded by the faceless figures. Karen frowned, clutching the paper. When Ethan came into the kitchen, she crouched down, holding it out. "Sweetheart, what's this supposed to be?" Ethan glanced at the drawing, his face expressionless. "That's me, in my room, at night." Karen's mouth went dry. "And who are these people around your bed?" "They're my friends," Ethan said softly. "They come when the lights are off." Her stomach twisted. "Friends? Honey, you mean you dream about them?" He shook his head. "Number, they're real." Karen forced a smile, brushing his hair back. Kids imagined things, she reminded herself. Invisible friends, monsters in the closet, shapes in the dark. But something about the way Ethan said it made her uneasy. That night, after tucking him in, she couldn't resist checking on him before bed. She stood quietly in his doorway, listening to the sound of his slow breathing. The night light glowed faintly in the corner, casting soft shadows on the walls. The room was perfectly ordinary, empty. Yet when she closed her eyes, she saw that drawing, those 7 black shapes leaning over her son's bed. The drawings continued. Each day, Ethan brought home new pages filled with stick figures. Sometimes there were 3, sometimes 5, sometimes all 7. They always surrounded his bed. Sometimes he drew them standing in the corners of his room, sometimes lined up at the foot of the mattress. One day, he drew one of the figures closer than the others, standing right beside his bed, its long arm reaching toward him. Karen couldn't hide her concern anymore. She asked him gently but firmly, "Why do you keep drawing these people?" Ethan's small shoulders lifted in a shrug. "Because they want me to." Karen's heart skipped. "They told you to." He nodded, fiddling with his pencil. "They say if I don't draw them, they'll get mad." Karen's blood ran cold. "What do they do when they're mad?" Ethan didn't answer. He just looked away. That night, Karen told Michael about the drawings. He laughed it off. "Kids get weird ideas. He's probably been watching too many cartoons." But Karen wasn't convinced. At 2 a.m., she woke to a sound in the house. Not loud, just a faint rustling, like fabric brushing against the floor. She slipped out of bed, padding softly down the hallway toward Ethan's room. She stopped in the doorway. Her son was asleep, curled beneath his blanket. But what made her blood turn to ice were the footprints. Muddy, bare footprints leading from the open window to Ethan's bed. Karen's breath caught in her throat. She flicked on the light. The footprints vanished instantly. Gone, as if they had never been there. She stood frozen, her hand trembling on the switch, staring at the spotless carpet. The next morning, Ethan handed her a new drawing. This time, one of the stick figures was drawn standing outside his window. The following nights grew worse. Karen began waking up at the same time, 3:13 a.m., always the same. The air in the house felt heavier, charged, like static before a storm. She would hear faint whispers, like a chorus of voices just beyond her hearing. Ethan grew pale, exhausted, dark circles forming under his eyes. When she asked if he was sleeping, he said, "Not really." "They don't let me." Karen pressed him, desperate. "Who doesn't let you, sweetheart?" "The tall one," Ethan whispered. "He's the leader. He stands by the window. The others just watch, but he tells me things." "What kind of things?" "That I belong to them. That one day I'll go with them." Karen felt sick. She wanted to believe it was a nightmare, a product of imagination, but then she saw the bruises. Small, round marks on Ethan's arms and legs, as though something had gripped him tightly in the night. Michael brushed it off as kids being rough at school. But Karen knew better. The breaking point came one stormy night. Thunder rattled the windows, and Karen lay awake, listening to the rain. Just as she began to drift off, she heard it again. Whispers, dozens of overlapping voices, low and urgent, coming from down the hall. Her chest tightened. She rushed to Ethan's room, flinging open the door. For one horrifying moment, she swore she saw them. 7 black shapes, tall and thin, looming around her son's bed. Their heads turned toward her in unison, empty eyes gleaming in the dark. The tallest stood at the window, his hand hovering above Ethan's chest. And then the lightning flashed, and the room was empty. Ethan stirred, whimpering in his sleep. Karen collapsed beside his bed, pulling him into her arms. Her tears mixed with the rain hammering outside as she whispered, "I won't let them take you. I won't." But deep down, she wasn't sure she could stop them. The next morning, Ethan handed her another drawing. This one chilled her more than all the rest. It showed Ethan, no longer in his bed, but standing in the woods. The 7 figures surrounded him, their arms reaching toward the sky, and at the top of the page, scrawled in messy letters, was a single word: tonight. Karen's hands shook as she clutched the paper. "Ethan, what does this mean?" she demanded. He wouldn't look at her. "They said it's time." That night, she didn't sleep at all. She sat in Ethan's room, clutching his hand, her eyes darting to every shadow. Hours dragged by, the clock ticking louder and louder. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the window rattled. The air grew icy cold. Ethan stirred beside her, his breath quickening. "They're here," he whispered. The shadows in the corners seemed to thicken, stretching taller, darker, until they were shapes, 7 in total. The tallest figure pressed a hand against the glass, and the window creaked open on its own, letting in the storm. Karen clutched Ethan, screaming, "Leave him alone!" The figures didn't move, didn't speak, but their empty eyes glowed faintly in the dark, fixed on her son. Lightning split the sky, and for a split second, Karen saw their faces. Not stick figures, but gaunt, twisted, inhuman. Their mouths opened in unison, but the sound that came out wasn't a scream. It was laughter. And then they were gone. The window slammed shut, the room plunging into silence once more. Karen held Ethan all night, her body trembling. The next morning, she found one final drawing on his desk. She hadn't seen him make it. She didn't even know when it appeared. It showed Ethan's room, empty. The bed was neatly made, but Ethan wasn't in it. Instead, he was standing at the window, holding hands with a tall figure. To this day, Karen keeps that drawing hidden away, buried in a box she can't bring herself to throw out. Ethan is older now, and he never speaks of the figures anymore, but sometimes, when she checks on him at night, she swears she sees shadows shifting near his window. And once, just once, she found a muddy footprint on his rug, too large to be his. When Emily was 3 years old, she carried her teddy bear everywhere. The bear was old, stitched up in places, its once white fur now dulled to a grayish cream. But Emily loved it more than anything. She called it Mr. Buttons because of the mismatched black buttons sewn where its eyes had once been. Her parents, Sarah and Daniel, found her attachment endearing, until it began to change. At first, it was simple. Emily would talk to Mr. Buttons while she played, whispering secrets only he could hear. That was normal, Sarah told herself. Lots of children had imaginary friends. But then, she started pausing before she spoke, as though listening to something first. Sometimes Sarah would peek in on her and see Emily nodding at the bear, as though agreeing with something it had said. "Emily," Sarah asked gently one afternoon, "what are you talking about with Mr. Buttons?" Emily looked up, her big eyes innocent. "He tells me things." Sarah laughed, nervously. "Oh, yeah? Like what?" Her daughter's voice was matter-of-fact. "Like where Daddy keeps his cigarettes, and that you cried in the bathroom last night." Sarah froze. Emily shouldn't have known those things. "Sweetheart," she said slowly, "how did you know that?" Emily hugged Mr. Buttons tighter. "He told me." That night, Sarah lay awake beside Daniel, listening to the soft hum of the baby monitor. Emily had fallen asleep, clutching Mr. Buttons, her small fingers curled around his worn paw. Around midnight, a sound crackled through the monitor. Not Emily's breathing, not her soft snores. A voice. Low. Male. Whispering. Sarah sat upright, heart hammering. She leaned close to the monitor, straining to hear. The words were muffled, garbled, but unmistakable. It was talking. Then Emily's sleepy voice answered, "Okay, Mr. Buttons, I won't tell." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She rushed to Emily's room, flinging open the door. Her daughter was sound asleep, clutching the teddy bear. The room was still, silent, but the monitor, still in Sarah's hand, hissed with static. Over the next few weeks, Emily's behavior grew stranger. She began refusing to go anywhere without the bear, even to the bathroom. If Sarah tried to take it from her, Emily would scream, a raw animalistic sound that didn't sound like her daughter at all. She started drawing pictures too, not her usual rainbows and stick figures, but dark scribbles of Mr. Buttons. Sometimes the bear had sharp teeth. Sometimes it was drawn standing beside Emily's bed while she slept. One drawing chilled Sarah the most. It showed their house, every room carefully outlined in crayon. In one corner, the figure of Mr. Buttons loomed, taller than the house itself, with long black claws stretching toward the roof. When Sarah asked Emily about it, she just said, "That's what he really looks like when he doesn't wear his fur." Daniel thought it was nonsense. "It's a doll," he said. "You're letting her imagination scare you." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house felt heavier at night, the shadows thicker. Sometimes she swore she heard scuttling noises in the hallway after Emily was asleep, small feet padding across the wood, followed by the faint creak of her daughter's door. One night, as Sarah walked past Emily's room, she froze. The door was slightly open. Through the crack, she saw Emily sitting upright in bed. The moonlight cast her face in pale blue, and there, in front of her, was Mr. Buttons, standing. For a split second, Sarah swore the teddy bear was upright, taller than Emily, its button eyes glinting in the dark. Then Emily giggled, clutching it, and the vision was gone. Sarah told herself she was imagining things. She had to be, but the image burned in her mind. The bear's head tilted, its long shadow stretching across the floor. The turning point came the night Mr. Buttons went missing. Sarah, desperate, had snatched it from Emily while she slept. She drove 10 miles out of town, heart racing, and threw the bear into a dumpster behind an old grocery store. She came home trembling but relieved. Maybe now things would go back to normal. The next morning, Emily's screams shattered the house. "Where's Mr. Buttons?" she shrieked, thrashing in her bed. Her small body shook with fury, her voice raw. Sarah tried to soothe her. "Sweetheart, he's gone. You don't need him anymore." Emily's face twisted into something unrecognizable. Her voice dropped, guttural, far too deep for a child. "You shouldn't have done that." Sarah stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. When Daniel came running in, Emily was crying like any normal child again, begging for her bear. But Sarah couldn't shake what she'd heard. That voice hadn't been Emily's. That night, Sarah locked Emily's door, terrified of what her daughter might do. She barely slept, pacing the living room until dawn. At 3 a.m., a thud echoed through the house. Then another. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Sarah froze. The sound came from the hallway, slow, dragging steps that stopped outside Emily's room. Then came the scratching, long, sharp claws raking across the wood. Sarah ran, throwing open the door, and screamed. Mr. Buttons was there, sitting neatly on Emily's pillow, exactly as if he had never left. Emily was fast asleep, her small arms wrapped tightly around him. Sarah staggered back, trembling. She knew she had thrown him away. She had seen him disappear into that dumpster, but now he was home again. The days after that blurred together. Emily stopped being her sweet, playful self. She grew quiet, watchful, her wide eyes always fixed on people when they weren't looking. Sometimes Sarah caught her whispering into Mr. Buttons' ear, then laughing at some private joke. One evening, Sarah found her daughter in the basement, holding the teddy bear and staring at the furnace. "What are you doing down here?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. Emily turned slowly, her eyes empty. "Mr. Buttons says it's warm down here. He likes it. He says this is where the bad kids go." "Bad kids," Sarah whispered. Emily's lips curled into a smile. "The ones whose mommies tried to throw him away." Sarah knew then that the bear wasn't just a toy. It was something else. Something using her daughter as a doorway. That night, she tried again, While Emily slept, Sarah crept into her room, hands shaking as she lifted the bear. Its fur was colder than she expected, icy against her skin. She carried it downstairs, every creak of the stairs loud in the silent house. She stuffed it into the fireplace, heart racing, and lit a match. The flames roared, devouring the old fabric. The smell of burning fur filled the air, acrid and thick. Sarah gagged, covering her mouth as black smoke curled upward. And then she heard it. A scream. Not Emily, not human. The sound ripped through the house, high-pitched and furious, echoing in the walls. Sarah clutched her ears, stumbling back. When it finally stopped, the bear was nothing but ashes. She collapsed, sobbing with relief. The next morning, she went to check on Emily. Her daughter was sitting up in bed, humming softly. "Morning, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, forcing a smile. Emily turned to her, and in her lap sat Mr. Buttons, pristine, whole. His black button eyes gleamed in the morning light. Emily hugged him tight. "He said you can't hurt him. He said you belong to him now, too." Sarah's knees buckled. She backed out of the room, her chest tight, bile rising in her throat. That night she locked herself in her bedroom, unable to sleep, clutching Daniel's hand. In the silence, just before dawn, she swore she heard footsteps outside their door. Small, padded ones. Then, a deeper voice whispered through the crack beneath the wood. "We'll be a family forever." There is no nightmare like losing a child. Most parents imagine dangers from outside, car accidents, strangers, illnesses. But for one young couple, the true horror came from inside their home, creeping into their nursery in the dead of night. Melissa and Aaron had their first child, a baby boy named Jacob, in the spring. He was tiny, perfect, with dark hair and wide brown eyes that seemed older than his weeks on earth. Melissa adored him, doting on him day and night, while Aaron tried his best to juggle his long shifts with being a new father. Like most modern parents, they bought a baby monitor, a sleek little device with a camera so they could watch Jacob sleep from their phones. At first, it was a comfort. Melissa would peek at him while folding laundry or cooking dinner, smiling at the sight of him wiggling in his crib. But within weeks, the comfort turned to dread. It began one night around 2 a.m. Jacob had been fussy, crying off and on, and Melissa finally managed to settle him in his crib. Exhausted, she crawled into bed beside Aaron and checked the monitor one last time. Her blood ran cold. The screen showed Jacob's crib, empty. Melissa bolted upright, heart slamming in her chest. "Aaron," she gasped, "he's gone." Her husband, half asleep, staggered up and rushed to the nursery. And there Jacob was, sleeping peacefully, right where they'd left him. Melissa stared at the crib, then at the monitor. The screen still showed nothing but a bare mattress. She blinked, refreshed the feed, even closed and reopened the app. Still empty. Finally, the image flickered, and Jacob appeared again as if nothing had happened. Aaron teased her about being overtired, but Melissa couldn't shake it. She knew what she'd seen. Over the next week, it happened again and again. Sometimes Jacob vanished from the screen for seconds, other times for minutes. Melissa would race into the nursery each time, only to find her son sleeping soundly, his chest rising and falling. The strangest part wasn't just his disappearance. It was what replaced him. At first, the crib simply looked empty, but then shadows appeared. Shapes. One night, Melissa watched in frozen terror as a tall figure seemed to stand over the crib. Its body was nothing but a blur of static, but its head bent unnaturally low, hovering just above Jacob. She dropped her phone, sprinted into the room and flicked on the light. Nothing, just her baby, wriggling, cooing softly. But when she looked back at the monitor, The shadow was still there. Melissa grew obsessed. She started recording the feed, scrolling through hours of footage each morning. Most of it showed nothing unusual, but sometimes she'd catch glimpses. A pale hand curling over the crib railing, a shadow gliding across the floor. Once, for a single frame, Jacob wasn't in the crib at all. Instead, the bed was occupied by something else. Something twisted and gaunt, with hollow black sockets where its eyes should be. Melissa screamed when she saw it, waking Aaron. But when she showed him, the recording had vanished. The clip skipped, the file corrupted. Aaron started losing patience. "You're scaring yourself," he told her. "There's nothing there." But Melissa knew better. The breaking point came one stormy night. Rain lashed the windows, thunder rattling the house. Melissa couldn't sleep, her nerves strung tight. She kept checking the monitor, watching Jacob toss in his crib. At 3:17 a.m., the feed went black. For 5 agonizing seconds, there was nothing. Then the screen returned, and the crib was empty. Melissa's scream tore through the house. She and Aaron raced to the nursery, but the crib was indeed empty. Jacob was gone. The blanket lay rumpled, the mattress bare. Melissa fell to her knees, wailing. Aaron tore through the house, shouting their son's name, searching closets, bathrooms, every corner. They called the police. Officers arrived, searching every inch of the house. The doors were locked, the windows sealed. There was no sign of forced entry. Yet Jacob was gone. It was as if he had simply vanished. For weeks, Melissa lived in a fog of grief. The police suspected abduction, but had no leads. Aaron tried to stay strong, but he too was crumbling, their marriage strained under the unbearable weight of loss. Then, one night, Melissa heard something through the monitor. She hadn't turned it off. She couldn't. It sat on her nightstand, silent, mocking her with Jacob's absence. But now, through its tiny speaker, came a sound. Crying. A baby's cry. Melissa's heart leapt into her throat. She fumbled for the monitor, her hands shaking. The screen flickered to life. And there was Jacob, lying in his crib, wailing, his little fists clenched. Melissa screamed for Aaron, and together they ran into the nursery, only to find the crib empty once more. When she looked back at the monitor, Jacob was still there, crying, reaching for her. She reached toward the screen, sobbing. And then the figure appeared again. That same tall, static shadow form looming over Jacob, its long arms curled downward, wrapping around him. Jacob's cry turned to a muffled whimper, then silence. The screen went black. Melissa became consumed with the idea that Jacob was trapped, not gone, trapped inside the monitor or in some place connected to it. She began researching haunted electronics, reading about spirits using devices as gateways. Aaron begged her to stop, but she couldn't. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, staring at the monitor night after night, praying for another glimpse of her baby. Sometimes she swore she heard Jacob's voice in the static, soft and pleading. "Mama! Mama!" One night she heard it clearly. "Mama, help me." Her blood ran cold. She clutched the monitor, tears streaming. "I'm here, baby, I'm here." The screen flickered, then showed Jacob again, his little face pressed against the crib bars, his eyes wide with terror. Behind him, the shadow loomed. Melissa didn't think. She grabbed the monitor, yanking it from the wall, clutching it to her chest. Instantly, the screen went black. But through the speaker came a voice. Not Jacob's. A low, guttural whisper. "You can come too." Aaron found her the next morning, lying on the nursery floor, clutching the baby monitor. She was unresponsive, her eyes glazed, whispering Jacob's name over and over. The doctors said it was a breakdown, grief-induced psychosis. But Aaron couldn't explain why When he powered on the monitor one last time, the feed didn't show an empty crib. It showed Melissa. Inside the crib. Her face pale, her eyes hollow, her mouth open in a silent scream before the image cut to black. The monitor has stayed off since then, but sometimes late at night, Aaron swears he hears crying echoing through the house. Not just Jacob's. Melissa's too.